Howdy, and welcome to LeeReads, where I talk about the books I've been reading and enjoying lately. I'm trying to record this video while puppy sitting, but he's only 5 months old, so let's see how long this lasts. This video is a wrap-up of the books that I read in September. In September, I took a little bit of time off from work, so I was able to do a lot more reading than normal. About half of the books that I read were science fiction and half were fantasy, and I did read one romance, so I'm going to group them in that order just so it doesn't seem too scatterbrained. The puppy has discovered my cats. In science fiction, I read 2 novellas by Becky Chambers. The first is To Be Taught If Fortunate, which is about a group of scientists who are sent on a space mission to study several exoplanets, and they're one of several space missions. They go into like a cryosleep between the planets, and then when they get there, they study them and collect data for years and years. While they are out on their mission, they lose all contact with Earth, and they need to sort of figure out what to do next. Since it's a novella, that's all I'm really going to say, but it was very thought-provoking. It was a little less cozy than a lot of the other Becky Chambers works I've read before, but I do think that this one is worth reading if you're a fan of sci-fi, specifically the exoplanet exploration sort of subgenre of that. The next Becky Chambers that I read was the second Monk and Robot book, which is A Prayer for the Crown Shy. In the first novella, this monk gets weary of the city life and goes and becomes a traveling tea monk and discovers a wild robot. In this world building, the robots gained artificial intelligence on their own generations ago and left the planet, but there were a few wild ones still around. The monk discovers one and they set out on like a small mission together. This novella is kind of part 2 of their initial agreement, and it definitely gave me the warm fuzzies. Again, if you want a novella that feels like a warm hug, then this one would be great to like curl up with on a rainy day. The next sci-fi I read, slightly different bent. It's called The Last Watch. It is about a legion of the space army of the Empire. They're stationed out at the fringes of the universe, like literally where the universe ends. And they are on watch because 200 years ago, some aliens came from the edge of the universe and it started a war. The 2 main characters, one is the disgraced grandson of the Emperor, which he's trying to keep that on the down low because people really don't like the Emperor, and he doesn't either, which is why he did something really bad to get him sent out there. It's basically like a penal station. The other main character is one of the heroes from the previous war, who also is stationed out there, which means she must have done something that she's now being punished for. They're realizing that stability is breaking down, the edge of the universe is creeping inward, and possibly those aliens are back. The story does a lot of cool things with time and relativity because you're out on the bubble edge of the universe. And I thought it was really cool, and it also had some fun action scenes in it, and I'll be reading the next one. The next sci-fi I read was an advanced reader's copy that a friend of mine gave because she is the author. It's called Anthrophage, and it comes out this month in October. I think October 14th. It is a sci-fi novel wrapped up in a pandemic novel. The primary characters that you're following are this very dedicated scientist who will stop at nothing to develop this cure for this rare illness her son has. The other is a software game developer whose daughter becomes patient 0 in this pandemic that occurs, and their storylines interweave as they're figuring out what's going on. And then eventually the story brings in a third perspective from a CDC epidemiologist who's trying to actually figure out what this disease is. She was my favorite character. Some of the other 2 characters do things that drove me a little bit crazy, but the thing is you can understand why they're doing it. You can see how individual humans make decisions for good or bad that can impact such a wider population. So if that sounds up your alley, you should definitely check out Anthrophage, which comes out in October. That was it for science fiction. Moving on to fantasy, at the end of last month, I read Naomi Novik's A Deadly Education, which I thought was, as I described it then, kind of a bonkers setup about this school called the Scholomance, where children from around the world go there to learn how to control their magic. During that age range is when these kids are the most vulnerable to these malevolent kind of monsters that are seeking them out and they want to eat them. So while they're in this school, they are learning how to survive the world. So I read book 2 in the trilogy earlier this month. It did not suffer from middle book syndrome. The plot kept going. She's in her senior year at the school, dealing with a lot of unexpected things that really helped set up the trilogy for its conclusion, but it didn't have like a draggy, soggy middle book syndrome feeling to it at all. I really enjoyed it. It was a page turner for me, and the third one came out this past week, and I've already started it. Next, I did an entire video dedicated to T. Kingfisher's Saint of Steel trilogy, Paladin's Grace, Paladin's Hope, and Paladin's Strength. So I won't go into too much detail here. I'll just say it's a fantasy romance adventure with really awesome world building and wonderful characters, and I wanted more of that world. So I read books that are set earlier that are actually, she published them earlier as well. So her writing isn't quite as strong, but it was still entertaining. This is the Clock Tower series. It's a duology. It's called The Clock Tower Boys and The Wonder Engine. So it's set in the same world. You're dealing with similar aspects of the world building, but this is more of a fantasy quest story. It really feels like one story that was cut into two. So the first book, The Clockwork Boys, is like the travelogue. It's like the traveling to the goal. And the second book is, now we're here. We have to figure out how in the world we are going to stop this horrible thing. 3 criminals and a scholar who is there for the knowledge. And the criminals have to succeed in this mission, or they've been branded with tattoos that will eat them. So they have great incentive to not abandon their quest. It follows a forger who, forges fake documents, can really turn the tides of financial fate for people. A disgraced paladin. He is a paladin for the dreaming god, which is the god that gives them the power to exorcise demons. And in the course of exorcising a demon, a sneakier one jumped in and possessed him, which caused some problems. And then the third is an assassin. So these 3 criminals and the scholar have to go solve this problem. It's very funny, and I admire so much how T. Kingfisher can get so much emotion into her writing when she really is fairly lean. So highly recommended. I've definitely been hooked by T. Kingfisher's writing, and I'm going to keep reading more of what she has published. Last, I read something definitely more cozy, which was Half a Soul, and the novella that follows it called The Lord Sorcerer, which I've heard a lot about on BookTube lately. This is an adult fantasy. Well, I would say it's a fantasy romance, kind of. It's about this woman who, as a child, she had half of her soul stolen by a fairy, and her cousin managed to stop the fairy before he was able to steal her entire soul, but it has dulled her emotions, so she doesn't feel things quite like how normal people feel them. This book to me felt like Howl's Moving Castle in a flintlock fantasy version of Bridgerton. She and her cousin grow up, they enter into society, they go to London because her cousin has to, find a husband. She stumbles upon the Lord Sorcerer, the king's magician, but no one really likes him because he's arrogant. He came from nothing. His position in society was elevated from a commoner. However, he is a very powerful magician who is trying to solve this sickness that has been spreading through the society, but also becomes interested in trying to fix the main character's curse. They start working together to sort of figure out what's causing the sleeping sickness and also how they can possibly get the other half of her soul back. And it was just very sweet. It was funny and it was witty. It definitely had its dark moments though. The book really has something to say about societal injustice. The last book that I read this month was a romance. It was called The Bodyguard, which I was interested in reading because it's sort of gender swapped from what you might normally expect. The bodyguard is this woman, and she is set to guard this very famous actor who has had some death threats against him. He is back home because his mother is getting treatment for cancer, and it's turns in basically into a fake dating trope. She has to pretend to be his girlfriend in order to protect him. It read a lot like a thriller because of the whole person who's set to kill him. Like, that part of the plot line really gets wrapped in there very nicely. So the romance had thriller vibes to it. And that's what I read in September. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you found some books that you loved in September. And if you did, please let me know what they were down in the comments. And I hope you have a great start to your fall. And don't forget to support your local library. Thanks. Bye.